I am 8 months pregnant and I've already made peace with the fact that my husband may bury me before I ever hold his child in my arms. That is not fear talking, OJ. That is arithmetics. 7 women slept in the same bed I sleep in now, and not one of them lived to see their child's first birthday. And every single time this man paid me in cash, my skull was split in half, as if my own body was screaming a warning I refused to hear. This is not a metaphor, OJ. That is the truest thing I will tell you in this whole confession. And it is the reason I am sitting, writing here, whilst shaking. My name does not matter. Call me whatever you like. I grew up in Techima in a compound house with 6 other families. My mother selling tomatoes by the roadside. We were not rich, OJ, but we were not desperate either. My mother always said a hungry stomach makes a woman always marry the wrong hand, and I believed her completely. I trained as a bank teller and got posted to a branch in Kumasi. That is where my ordinary life ended, though I did not know it yet. He walked into the banking hall in a suit that cost more than my mother's entire kiosk. Everyone called him chairman, though that was not his real title. I will call him Kwabna, OJ, not his real name either, but close enough that you understand the kind of confidence this man carried into every room he entered. He did not flirt like the small boys I used to know. He simply asked for my number, said thank you, and walked out like a king leaving his court. My colleagues teased me for a whole week, saying a man like that does not return for an ordinary teller, saying I should prepare my heart for disappointment. For 2 weeks, he sent nothing but polite messages. Then the gifts started, small ones, perfume, fabric, things a woman notices but does not question out loud. Then came the first time he handed me cash directly. Folded notes pressed into my palm at a fuel station in Koforidua, and my head split open with pain. OJ, I want you to picture the worst migraine of your life multiplied by 10, arriving in under 1 second, the moment his skin touched mine with that money. I dropped the notes. He laughed and said I was being dramatic, picked them up by himself, and pushed them into my handbag instead of my open hands. The pain stopped instantly once the money left his fingers and touched the fabric instead of my skin. I told myself it was stress, exhaustion, low blood sugar. But it kept happening every single time, cash from his hand to my hand. Mobile money never did this. Bank transfers never did this. Only his bare hands. I began to dread the moments he reached for his wallet, even though the money itself never once disappointed me, only the manner in which it arrived. I should have run the first month, OJ. Instead, I told myself I had finally found a serious man, and serious men deserve patience, not paranoia. 3 months later, he asked me to meet my mother. He did not come with flowers. He came with a car full of provisions and an envelope thick enough to make her weep. My mother took me aside in the kitchen and told me plainly that some blessings do not knock twice, and I should not be the fool who lets one pass. I wanted more time, OJ. I told her about the headaches, the strange pain that came only with his cash, and she waved her hand like I was speaking nonsense. She said, every man has one strange habit, and mine happened to come with a 4-bedroom house and a car with leather seats, so I should count myself lucky. My younger sister, still in school at that time, asked me privately if I was scared. And I lied to her face and told her everything was fine. Within a month, OJ, the bride price was fully paid, more than my family had ever asked for, and my aunties were already rehearsing what cloth to wear. The wedding was itself small, quick, almost rushed, held in a rented hall in Koforidra, with barely 3 weeks of planning between the proposal and the vows. I moved into his house on the outskirts of Takrady, a compound with high walls and a gate that locked from the inside with a code only he knew. The house had 9 rooms, OJ, far more than 2 people could ever need. And from the very first night, I felt like a guest inside my own marriage. The rules began before my bags were even fully unpacked from the boot of his car, delivered calmly, the way a manager reads out office policy to a new hire. No visiting the neighbors, no inviting my old friends from Kumasi, no wandering into the 2 rooms at the far end of the corridor, the ones with the black painted doors. He said those rooms belonged to his late father's business records, nothing more, that a wife who respected her husband would not need to ask twice about locked doors. I obeyed for almost a year because obedience was all I had ever been taught, and because the house, the car, the money, they were intoxicating in their comfort. On our wedding night itself, OJ, something small happened that I buried at the back of my mind for months, refusing to let it mean anything at all. As I slid a ring onto my finger, the generator outside coughed and died, plunged the whole compound into darkness for almost a full uncomfortable minute. He laughed it off, called it Ghana's power situation, and everyone laughed with him. But I noticed his hand had gone cold before the lights even failed. I told myself generators fail everywhere, OJ. That darkness on a wedding night means nothing. That only foolish women read omens into faulty electrical wirings. There were nights he could rise from our bed mid-embrace, walk to those black doors, and return an hour later, smelling of burnt herbs and something sour underneath. I never asked. I had trained myself not to ask. The same way I had trained myself to accept a migraine every time cash touched my open palm. Sometimes he traveled for businesses to Sunyani, to Tamale, once even to Accra for a full week, and the house would feel colder in his absence. On those nights alone, I would stand outside the black door, staring, telling myself repeatedly that curiosity had ruined better women than me before this night. One afternoon, the house girl fell sick and went to her village, and boredom pushed me towards cleaning corners of the house I had never touched before that day. The code to the black door had been left exposed on a torn paper inside his study drawer, and curiosity did what a year of obedience could not manage. Inside OJ, there was no business record. There was a low altar draped in red cloth, 7 black candles burnt down to their stouts, and a carved mirror. Beside the altar sat a leathered bonded ledger, and inside that ledger were names, 7 of them, each one crossed out with a single thick red line drawn firmly. Under each crossed name was a date, and beside each date, one word written in a shaking hand that did not match his usual confident signature. The word was delivered. I did not understand it then, OJ. I only understood that my husband had lied about those rooms, and that lie sat heavier in my stomach than any headache. I photographed nothing, OJ, because My hands were trembling too hard to hold my phone steady, and some parts of me had already feared being caught with proof. When he returned that evening, I made the mistake of mentioning the ledger, thinking a husband confronted gently would simply explain himself and put my heart at ease quickly. His face changed in a way I had never seen. OJ, calm sliding off it like water off a zinc roof. And for one moment, I feared for my life. Then just as quickly, he smiled again, told me those were old business partners who had passed on, and business people, he said, keep records even of the dead. I accepted the lie because accepting was easier than living in a house where the truth might cost me something I was not yet ready to lose forever. For a while, life returned to its rhythm. Breakfast together, his trips, his silences, my great habit of avoiding that corridor entirely, pretending those black doors did not exist. Weeks later, I discovered I was pregnant, and instead of joy, the first thing I felt, OJ, was a coldness spreading from the chest down into my fingers. My husband, when I told him, did not celebrate the way other men celebrate. He simply nodded, said good, and walked straight towards the black painted door again. That night, the smell of burnt herbs lingered in the corridor until morning, thicker than I had ever noticed before, and I lay awake listening to sounds I could not name. Around the same time, a woman from 3 houses down, visiting my sister from Tamale, called me over the low wall one Saturday morning while I hung out washing to dry. She looked at my stomach a long time before she spoke, and when she finally opened her mouth, her voice carried the weight of something rehearsed for many years. She asked how many months I was carrying, and when I told her, she asked me a second question that has not left my head since that quiet morning. She asked if I knew I was the 8th woman to carry a child for the owner of that house, and if I knew what happened to the other 7 before me. OJ, my legs went weak against that wall. I asked her what she meant, and she told me plainly that all 7 wives before me had died giving birth. Every single one, she said, delivered a healthy child, and every single one bled to death within hours, while the man's businesses somehow multiplied overnight after each quiet burial. She told me his wealth rose sharply after each funeral, then slowly declined over the following year until another young wife appeared, pregnant, and the cycle repeated itself again. She said the neighbors had stopped attending his weddings years ago, tired of watching brides arrive laughing and leave later in coffins draped in white and gold cloth. She told me she had personally known the 6th wife, a quiet nurse from Cape Coast, who had shown her the very black painted door months before her wedding day. That nurse, she said, had also complained of pain whenever cash passed through his hands into her fingers. The exact same pain I had been carrying silently for over a year. I asked the woman why she had never warned that nurse properly, and she looked away, saying some warnings only reach the ears of women already searching for them. I understood her meaning immediately, OJ, because I too had ignored every quiet sign for over a year, choosing comfort over the discomfort of asking harder questions. Before I left her wall that morning, she gave me one final piece of information I have not been able to shake loose from my mind since. She said a gardener had once found a small tin box buried beneath the mango tree behind the black room containing 7 tiny bundles wrapped in red thread. He had reburied it immediately, out of fear, she said, and had refused to work in that garden again without another man standing beside him at all times. I remembered the ledger then, the 7 crossed names, the single word beside each date, delivered. It had never meant childbirth in the way I first understood it. I went home that night and could not look at my husband the same way. I could not eat food he had touched. I could not sleep beside him again. I began pretending to sleep whenever he entered the bedroom, listening instead for the sound of his footsteps heading towards the corridor with those black painted doors. 3 days later, I packed one bag while he was away on business in Sunyani, and I boarded the first available bus back to my mother's compound in Tachima. My mother did not celebrate my return, Oje. She wept, not for my safety, but because she believed I had thrown away the greatest fortune our family would ever see. My sister was the only one who held me properly that first night, whispering that she had always felt something heavy whenever the man visited our small compound house. I have not heard from my husband since I left that house. No calls, no messages. No men sent to drag me back. Only silence, stretching longer each passing week. That silence frightened me more than an anger ever could, OJ. Because a man who does not chase what he considers his property is a man still confident of his outcome. I have visited 3 different prayer camps since I returned. One in Cape Coast, one outside Cape Coast, and one small chapel deep in the hills near Tachima itself. The first prophet told me the child inside me carries a mark that money cannot erase, and that I should prepare my heart for a battle already half lost. The second told me the opposite, that fasting and sacrifice, prayer, could sever whatever covenant had been made before I ever entered that man's bed at all. The third simply looked at me, refused to collect his usual offering, and told my mother quietly that some houses should never have been walked into at all. A fourth woman, not a prophet, but an old herbalist near Techima, told me the pain in my head whenever I touched his cash was my own body warning me from the very beginning. She burnt a small root in front of me, told me to breathe that smoke, and said if I coughed twice, it meant the covenant had already fastened itself around my child. I coughed twice, OJ. She did not say another word. After that, she simply packed her things quietly and refused to accept any payment for her time that afternoon. I left her compound with my hands shaking harder than they had shaken even inside the black room, because silence from a woman like her frightened me more than any warning. She had told me once before I left that the body sometimes knows before the mind is ready to listen, and that I had ignored my own warnings for the sake of comfort. My mother has since stopped asking me questions about the marriage, as though some part of her already suspects the answer and prefers not to hear it spoken aloud. I am 8 months now, OJ, and every kick inside me feels like both a blessing and a countdown clock that I did not agree to start. I have not told my husband where I am. I do not know if he is searching quietly. I do not know if silence simply means he is waiting for the birth. The ledger, the black candles, the word written 7 times in that shaking hands. None of it has left my mind since the day I found that hidden room. I still get that same splitting pain sometimes. Even now, months after I last touched a single note of his cash with my own two bare hands. My doctors say it is stress. My mother says it is exhaustion from the pregnancy. I say nothing because what would I even tell them that they would believe? Some nights I dream of the covered mirror in the black room. And in the dreams, I am the one whose reflection is finally allowed to show through the cloth. I wake up from those dreams unable to breathe properly, my hands pressed against my stomach, always checking that whatever is growing inside of me is still simply mine. I do not know what is waiting for me on the day this child decides to come. Oje, I do not know if I will become the 8th crossed name. I am not calling you tonight for a miracle ending because I do not believe one is coming for me. I am writing to you because someone outside my family needed to know this. If something happens to me after this child is born, I want it written somewhere that I was not simply unlucky, that a pattern existed long before I ever arrived at that house. 7 women walked into that house before me and did not walk back out of it. I do not know if I will be the 8th name crossed on that page. That is where I will end tonight. Not with an answer, not with peace, just with a woman counting days and waiting to see which prophet was right. This is your anonymous OJ, and if you are new here, I would like you to like, subscribe, share, comment, and hype this channel. And tell somebody about your anonymous OJ. I'll see you in our next conversion.